Hey there, everyone. Today we're gonna be answering an extremely interesting question. And by the way, this wasn't something that I came up with. This was actually sent in by one of our viewers. Because at first glance, these two words appear to be exactly the same. I was in high school so many years ago, and my chemistry teacher, who was a bit of an odd fellow, would always refer to himself as a skeptic. Now he didn't mean it in the sense of being skeptical of everything. No, his skepticism was more like skepticism toward science. Whereas skeptics tend to disbelieve things until they are proven. They don't just believe everything that they hear or read. They tend to analyze the information that they receive, and they tend to ask a lot of questions. First, skeptics are generally more open-minded than skeptics. Skeptics have already decided that nothing can be proven, whereas skeptics are willing to consider the possibility that something can be proven. Most of us are not pure skeptics, nor are we pure skeptics. We all fall somewhere in between. Some of us are more skeptical, while others are more septic. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. The truth is that we all need to be a bit of both. We need to be skeptical enough to question things and not believe everything we hear, but we also need to be septic enough to be open-minded and not reject all forms of evidence. Second, skeptics tend to be more rational than skeptics. That is to say that they base their beliefs on reason rather than emotion. Skeptics, on the other hand, can be quite emotional. In fact, skeptics are often dogmatic. They become upset when their beliefs are challenged. And sometimes they will go out of their way to avoid anyone who might challenge their beliefs. Third, skeptics tend to be more tolerant than skeptics. Skeptics are often intolerant of other people's beliefs, especially if they are different from their own. Skeptics like to examine the evidence for themselves, and they will accept something as true just because someone else says it. These are the people who don't really believe anything unless they see it with their own eyes. You could tell them that the sky is green and they would probably ask for proof. They wouldn't believe you until they saw it for themselves. Then there are hard skeptics, people who have completely rejected all forms of knowledge. They don't believe anything and they reject all forms of evidence. You could show them the greenest of skies and they still wouldn't believe you. In fact, skeptics often need proof. We all know someone like this. Someone who, no matter how many times you tell them something, they always seem to have doubts about it. I think that this is an important distinction to make because it helps us to understand the different ways in which people view the world. It also helps us to be more tolerant of other people's beliefs, even if we don't agree with them. After all, there is no point in getting upset at someone for believing something that you yourself also believe. The problem with this is that even though skeptics tend to be intelligent and well-informed, they can sometimes be seen as negative because they refuse to just accept things at face value. And sometimes skeptics can be so demanding that it makes it difficult to share information with them. You almost have to prove everything that you tell them. And what's worse is that it's often impossible to prove certain things. For example, if I told you that there were ghosts walking around outside right now, you probably wouldn't believe me, and rightly so. How could I prove it? But even though it's a reasonable demand that you require proof before believing something, it does make it difficult to share information with you. Now there are some other important differences between these two terms, but before we get into them, nothing can be proven. Nothing can be accepted as true until it has been proven. Now, the problem with this way of thinking is that since nothing can be proven, skeptics tend to miss out on a lot of things in life. Take religion, for example. A lot of religions are based on faith, which is basically the opposite of skepticism. Most major religions cannot be proven or disproven. And that's why those who hold a strong belief in them cannot be skeptics. If someone believes in God, they do so despite the lack of evidence. And this also applies to things like astrology. There's a lot of people who believe in astrology, but no one can really prove or disprove it. So if you wanted to be a skeptic and believe only what you can prove, then you couldn't be an astrologist. I just want to mention that I think it is great that we have these two separate words because they help us to differentiate between two different types of people. He was a firm believer that everything that was taught in science class was wrong. And to be honest, he wasn't very good at his job because instead of teaching us what we were supposed to learn, he spent most of his time telling us why everything that was written in our textbooks was wrong. And you know what? It worked. I still remember that guy to this day, and I can still hear him saying things like, "Everything you're about to learn in here is garbage," or "These scientists, they don't know what they're talking about. I never learned anything from that guy, but I did learn what skepticism meant. They are spelled differently, but they sound the exact same. And if you've ever heard someone say one of those words, it's probably been skepticism. Septicism isn't really a word that gets used very often, but when it is used, people usually know what it means. So if you have any questions about the English language, feel free to send them in. And I might use yours in an upcoming episode. So today we're going to try and answer, what is the difference between septicism and skepticism? Now let me tell you a little story. Now the funny thing is that I'm pretty sure he thought of himself as a skeptic, but really he was a septic. Not only was he not skeptical of anything, he was skeptical of science. Skepticism is really just a belief that everything is true until proven otherwise. But septicism is a belief that everything is false until proven true. Okay, so the main difference between these two words is that skeptics tend to believe things until they are disproven. Let's take a look at both sides. On the one hand, we have the skeptics. Now, skeptics are people who are not gullible. On the other end, we have the septics. Now, unlike skeptics, septics have already decided that nothing is true. Okay, so there's a few key differences between these two terms. Now, it's important to note that not all septics are the same. There are different degrees of septicism. Some septics are what I would call soft septics. In reality, we all fall somewhere on the spectrum between skepticism and septicism. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, great, so what does this all mean? Well, I'll tell you. Well, that's it for today's lesson. I hope that you enjoyed it and I hope that you learned something new.